I'm Bob Jacoby, a professor of geology at UB and also director of special projects at Norse Energy. Before we start, I'd like to thank the organizers of this really good series, which include Mike Joy, he's over there, and John Holkel, are you here? He's not here. He's at another conference. And Marcus Bursick, the usual moderator, is not here because he's teaching the UB Geology Field Camp out in Utah. Also, Dennis Holbrook, are you here? No. So those are the people that helped organize it, and then the UB special events are the ones that have kept everything running so smoothly. So thank you, everyone. Yeah, oh yeah, let's do that. The format for this lecture will be the same as always. John Martin will give about an hour's talk, and then we'll have a 3 or 5 minute intermission. Then if there are any students that want questions answered, they start, and then the rest of us can grill John.
Have the students all gone?
Mostly, if they were smart. So now, about John Martin. I've known him for almost as long as you were at NYSERDA. I guess that's true. I've known him for probably 17 or 20 years. He was the prime person that funded science in New York State from NYSERDA. There was no other science in geology going on that was funded. He was the only one that understood that science is important in terms of geology. Not always directly applicable, but you'll at some point learn something that will be of critical import, and that's how it worked out. Now, he sent me a really beautiful bio that says things such as he served on various state and national panels, including USDOE's Unconventional Resources Technical Advisory Committee, which was established to advise the department on the development and implementation of programs related to onshore and unconventional natural gas and other petroleum resources. He co-directed the governor's carbon capture and sequestration working group. And in this thing, it doesn't say that you were also the wind power.
I have a slide.
Okay. He's done almost everything. And in addition, as far as I can tell, he was the first person to ever suggest that the Utica Shale might be a source for gas. I mean, you can hear that others, such as Terry Engelder, about 2 years ago, finally learned there was a second black shale in the world. Not just Marcellus, there's another one. Well, John knew that 15 years ago. Now, where did he get his degrees? He has a PhD in urban and environmental studies, an MS in economics, and a BS in geology, all from Rensselaer Polytechnic. He has an MBA from Miami University. You see what I mean? He's done almost everything.
You missed the last one.
Mineral economics.
Yeah.
There's everything in this one guy. So I'm going to stop, and now it's John's turn.
Thanks. Good evening. Oh boy, that's hot. That's very hot. That's good though. Yeah, I actually have a slide that talks a little bit about my background, but the title of this is, Can we get to sustainable energy resource development in the 21st century? And you know, this has become a capstone talk for these sort of Marcellus Shale series because it puts in perspective the energy source you've already heard about if you've been here. Is that any first timers? Okay, I can't help you. But the rest of you have heard other talks, so. Okay. So my experience, as I pointed out, I worked on compressed air energy storage, geothermal energy, compressed carbon capture and sequestration, wind research, and done lots of geology stuff. I worked on the Madison wind power plant, both from a financial perspective as well as an environmental perspective. And I actually did some hydropower work, which involved like fish. And I realized I didn't like fish, really in any way, shape, or form, but I was saving the fish, and then I had to like play with the fish, and I really had enough. But I did fish, and I worked for West Valley, which is a nuclear site. So this talk is kind of an aggregation of my experience to tell you a little bit about energy and what we have facing us. But I want to start, I named the talk Sustainable, and sustainable is a really important thing to know about. Here's 3 definitions I found on about a 20-minute search. Able to be sustained for an indefinite period without damaging the environment or without depleting the resource, renewable. The second one, scary enough is from the EPA, and I'd like somebody to even tell me what this means. Social and environmental practices that protect and enhance the human and natural resources needed by future generations to enjoy a quality of life equal or greater to our own. I have no idea what that means. I'm an economist. Of relating to or being a method of harvesting or using a resource so that the resource is not depleted or permanently damaged is the last one. That's from Webster's. So these are three very different definitions of what sustainable is. And that's one of the problems when we have a discussion about sustainable energy. Nobody really knows what they're talking about because there is no clear definition of what is sustainable. Now, let's put it in a global context. And this is what, I do these talks and I find some stupid fun facts. So this is the stupid fun fact. The UTI report, Trends in Telecommunications Reform 2010-2011, just came out, says that 5.3 billion mobile cellular subscriptions across the world, including 940 million subscriptions to mobile broadband, exist. There's about 6 million people on the planet. We're talking about a 90% penetration. 90% of the world's population has access to cellular phones now. That's just stunning. 2 billion videos are watched every day on YouTube. 5 billion photos are now hosted on Flickr. You can see we use it for very, very important things. But what's stunning about that is how global we are as an economy now. The world economy is global. This is just one of those factoids that just amazed me. So I got thinking about, well, how is that relevant to the world economy? And this is kind of a cool chart. And in mineral economics, we have all these cool charts. But this one says, going up on the side, right here, is Human Development Index of the United Nations. 1 being the most developed, and 0.2, I guess you can't go below 0.2. So I'm not sure who's 0.2. Across this way, we have annual energy use per capita. And you see there's a natural arc kind of, there's a function that says as you get more developed, there's more energy use, right? And why is that relevant? Well, that's us, that's them. And them is a couple of billion people who all have cell phones now and want other stuff as well. So, it's a fascinating thing. Mobile devices are just the beginning. Expect many other aspects of life in those other countries to start to look like us. I went to China last year, and I just got asked to go to India in 2 weeks, which I'm not really sure I'm comfortable with at the moment. But when you go to these countries, you realize they're a lot more like us than we think, and they're going to be a lot more like us in 10 years. If you haven't visited China, you'll notice they have cars everywhere. They like Buicks. That's why Pontiac is dead and Buick is not. They also like MGs, and I took this picture. Morris's Garages, they got the S on there because they don't care, this Chinese, but they bought the MG logo. It's now a Chinese car company. And if they all move to our standard, it means world energy consumption is going to go up by a factor of 2 or more. What are we going to do about that? How are we going to get sustainable? What are our choices? Well, not a lot. We have sun, fusion energy, direct solar, PV, or solar thermal, indirect solar, wind, waves, and hydro, chemical energy from photosynthesis. You have biomass, which I consider just to be very, 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 very young coal, oil, and gas. Ancient sequestered energy. You have nuclear fission, geothermal energy from the Earth, and the gravitational pull of the moon. That's it. There's nothing else in the toolbox. You never hear that, though. That's it. Well, I want to look at this whole perspective of energy from what I call a life cycle approach. And the reason you use a life cycle approach is it really considers all aspects of energy. And it's not, this is more a heuristic talk. I'm not going to get into a lot of data. I have some data because this is a pretty massive undertaking. But what you have is you have inputs. You have to consider the impact of inputs, the impact of the system, and the impact of outputs. This chart I took from Kazuhiko Yamada. But he doesn't have over here the good stuff, but there's good stuff as well. And you have to look at this. So you extract the minerals, you process them, you make something, you use it, you recycle it, you have waste to manage. This is the full life cycle of impact, and that's what we're going to talk about for all energy sources today. I'm going to start with solar and wind. And I've done solar projects. You saw that before. I did off-grid solar. I've done the big wind projects as well. I've done some small wind projects. And this seems to be the thing you hear most about. I'm going to use a structure that's called sources and uses. We use it in finance, but I liked it for energy. And it's solar energy. The source is the sun. That's kind of like duh, but not so heavy. Uses, primary energy, we use it for electric generation and space and water heating. In fact, the sun for heating is probably used more around the world than it is for electricity at this point. Secondary, there's this talk of using it for hydrogen production, and I put that down because it's proposed, but it's something to consider. We can generate hydrogen from renewable energy. And wind. Onshore and offshore wind, I separated them because they actually have definitely different profiles of impact. Uses, primarily electricity. These are electric generation. Secondary, really going back to an old model, you can use it for mechanical energy directly, and then again, hydrogen production. So those are the sources of uses of solar. But I want to look at photovoltaic manufacturing life cycle. And what most people don't realize is that you take a lot of material to make a panel that makes a little bit of energy. And it all starts with mining. And typical solar cells are made out of silica, which you have to mine quartz and then process the mined products. The newer ones are made out of things like cadmium and tellurium, and those things come from zinc and copper mining. They're byproducts of zinc and copper mining, which means you have to have mining to have solar cells. It's easy as that. Balance of systems is the steel and aluminum and glass used to make other aspects of the module. So the impact is you have mining if you have wind and solar. Now, when you make a wind turbine, you have, this is the profile and the manufacturing process of building the wind turbine. They call it manufacturing, but it's really building it. Most of your energy goes into the cement that's used to make the foundation for the wind turbine. And then you use petrochemicals and energy to make the blades and the rotor and then everything else. It turns out that you can recycle the wind turbine pretty efficiently. So you get a net back down here. So this is kind of the life cycle. And this is just to give you an idea that it takes energy to make these things. But here, this is like the best article. You know, speakers kill for stuff like this. Mining, is it strategic and sexy? Paul Stowart, Vice President of Economic Affairs of the Mining Association of Canada. The second quote, and it's unlikely that this strategic and sexy characteristic will diminish anytime soon. What's the characteristic? The first quote, mining sector linkages to worldwide clean energy revolution is direct and fundamental. Hybrid engines, long-life batteries, wind turbines, solar cells, lightweight materials are all dependent on the mining industry. It's simple as that. This is going to be a boon for global mining. It's easy as that. For the next 25 years, they expect mining production to double. Unfortunately, where are most of these minerals? Anybody? China. All right, I'm going to do this. I'm talking about the positive and negative impacts. And we talk about the obvious ones are, of course, with any energy source, you create jobs. In the case of solar, it's the installation. In the case of wind, it's the construction of the plant. You generate taxes. In New York, it's called a pilot, payment in lieu of taxes for both. But on the other side, you need lots of space for solar energy, either roofs or central station. Wind has its own issues with birds and bats. Birds is kind of a ruse. Bats is a serious problem. They fly through the back of the turbine. They go through a pressure change, and they get the bends. So that's actually one of the environmental issues that we're working on pretty quickly to try to resolve. But you have visual and noise, and I personally don't see these things as a big problem, but I don't live next to a wind turbine. You look at the societal thing, and this is part of life cycle. You have to make consideration for societal impacts. Societally, you have economic development. I mean, there's mining and manufacturing jobs, there's production jobs. Energy for society, which is a huge issue of everything we talk about. Domestic production, but with low and intermittent availability, which means you have to have some backup system. Climate change reduction is significant. There's no emissions from operations. On the other side, it requires storage and backups. Compressed air energy storage is case. Drilling, you have to drill those wells, you have to inject things that you have to know your subsurface, you use your subsurface to store energy as air and then bring it back up as when you need it to turn turbines. Manufacturing process and mining, as we talked about, and some of these things are pretty nasty. Silicon, iron, aluminum, byproducts of zinc, copper, lead to get some of the minerals we need. So positive and negative. It's a very good energy source from a climate change perspective, but you do have mining. Now, occasionally a wind turbine falls down. And it's odd, but New York is the capital of falling wind turbines. These are all New York. These are all New York. No, I can't figure it out. My plant didn't fall down, okay? I'm going to point that out. But, you know, these ones were strikes where the blades got out of control and hit the tower and fell over. This one just pulled itself out of the ground, and that's the path of it rolling. So it landed there and it rolled over here. It's kind of cool. But there's an impact. There's an impact. Let's look at nuclear energy. It's been in the news a lot lately. Sources it: fission of uranium and plutonium, and fusion, the energy of tomorrow, and, Bob? And always will be. Unless you're at either the University of Rochester or Princeton University, where it's a continual source of fundraising from the federal government. They get money for fusion forever. Use primarily baseload electric generation. That's about all you can use nuclear power for. I want to talk about land use and energy, though, with nuclear power. It turns out that nuclear power needs the smallest footprint of any energy source. And so this is for equivalent size plants. You need about 1 to 4 kilometers for a typical 1,000 megawatt equivalent nuclear plant. But solar thermal, you need almost 50 square kilometers. Wind fields, you need a huge area. Biomass plants, you need thousands of square kilometers of province. So nuclear, from the footprint perspective, for the amount of energy you get, you only need 30 tons of uranium a year to be mined, which is a couple of railroad cars. It looks really good. Unfortunately, we have little problems. Anybody live near West Valley? No? No? You know West Valley, right? West Valley is a continual problem. They've spent now $2 billion trying to clean up West Valley. And all they did there was, for a period of a decade, reprocess uranium for commercial use. They left a legacy that will last decades. Well, okay, positive and negative again. Jobs, construction operations. Nuclear power plants use more people than any other power for the same thing. They tend to pay taxes. They use a lot of water because it's a steam turbine plant for the most part. They have the occasional radioactive leak. Fish and other species are affected by that. Site restoration issues are pretty significant. Decommissioning nuclear power plants will not be easy. We have over 100 in the United States. On the other side, societal impacts, economic development, energy for society, and all that stuff. Climate change, it's real good. It has the highest energy per square foot and fuel input of all energy sources. It's by far the best. We have these long-lasting problems. I mentioned West Valley. Well, let's just throw in Chernobyl. Reactor accident release, waste repository release, uranium mining issues. Uranium mining is a bit of a nasty business. So it has some positives and it has an awful lot of negatives. And then we have those occasional leaks. And we're living through Fukushima as we go, but you probably don't know about Vermont Yankee, where the company that bought the plant was asked, when a radiation leak was found around the plant in Brattleboro, Vermont, was asked, do you have any piping that might be leaking? And they said, well, we don't have any underground pipes. Until they read the blueprints, and they said, oh, we have underground pipes that are leaking. Sorry, we didn't know that. Did not make the people in Vermont feel very comfortable. Hydropower. Source, rivers and streams, tides and waves, construction impoundments. You can actually make an artificial impoundment for pump storage hydro. The uses are primarily baseload electricity generation, but hydro is a particularly good peaking generating source. In August, when you need power here, they open the gates up in Lewiston. And they run a peaker plant up there. It's a big peaker plant. Where I live, it's in Blenheim, Gilboa. Secondary use is direct mechanical energy. Not so much anymore, but in some countries it's still important. But I want to talk about the Three Gorges Dam. Anybody know about Three Gorges Dam in China? It's the largest dam in the world. So here's a shot before the dam was built. And here's what it looks like now. And you can see the dam is right there. And it floods back for hundreds of kilometers on all these streams. This used to be a historic site that's now underwater. That's one of the downsides of flooding an enormous area. The other downside is moving somewhere between 1 and 2 million people had to be relocated. The dam itself measures 1.5 miles in length, 607 feet high. It's by far the largest in sheer size, but it's only second in energy production to a plant in Brazil. So I did some math, and now this was sort of me on the back of an envelope math. It's 18,200 megawatt capacity. It's going to be at 2,200, but it's not there yet. That's equivalent to 8 Indian Point nuclear power plants. 12,000 2.5, which is the big ones, by the way, 12,000 wind turbines, or 400 new shale wells, which have to be replaced due to the decline curve of shale wells, which adds up to about 3,200 shale wells. So you can see, this dam may be disruptive in many respects, but it's a huge source of power for China. So how big? Well, when you make one, you get construction jobs, because you got to pour an awful lot of concrete. Flood control. Most people don't realize one of the other things about Three Gorges is it was for flood control. I live right near the Hudson River, and that's controlled by the Saconaga Reservoir for flood control. On the negative side, you had watershed impacts. You disrupt stream flow, you completely change the ecosystem. You have siltation problems above the dam, which really starts to restrict the power output for some of these dams, and that's going to be a big problem at Three Gorges. Reduced sediment flow, which causes downstream to dry up. Why are beaches eroding along the Atlantic coast? Is because a lot of rivers are dammed up and the sediment never makes it to replenish beaches. Ecosystem impacts, habitat destruction, including wetlands, rapids, and forests. Fish and other species are wiped out. We have societal impacts. On the other side, we build a plant. We have transportation infrastructure that's created. Usually dams create a bunch of recreational activities, energy for societies. Hydropower often is 100% available. Three Gorges, interestingly enough, is not close. Long plant life. Most of the plants in New York are 100 years old. Climate change reductions, again, after the initial construction where you have a huge increase in CO2 emissions from dead biomass, it comes down and it's quite good. On the other side, you have change in community character, i.e. relocation and elimination of communities. Ways of life are changed and historic and other unique sites are eliminated. And here's one in New York you may not be aware about, but the Gilboa Forest, which is located within the town of Gilboa, New York, in Schoharie County, was the oldest known forest fossils were found there. These were Gilboa trees, they're called, were found there. They're now under the Schoharie Reservoir of a hydropower project. And this is a picture from one of those tree stumps being taken out back in the 30s when they built it. So, geothermal energy. Sources: warm and geopressured fluids from the earth, hot, dry rock formations, which means they don't have fluid in them, but you inject fluid in to heat mine it back out. We call those enhanced geothermal systems. Uses: electric generation, direct heating and cooling, cogeneration, which is both, by the way. You generate electricity and you generate heating. And heat sink for systems using other fuels. Now, the two systems we talk about, mostly we have hydrothermal systems in the world right now, and the US is the leader of hydropower, or of geothermal power. But there's something called enhanced geothermal systems, which really aren't any commercial, but they're near commercial at this point, where you inject water in. They flow through fractures in the rock that are artificially created through hydraulic fracturing, and then you bring the heat back out. It turns out they use a lot of water, though. Water use is required for both traditional geothermal and enhanced geothermal systems. And they require you drilling wells to get to the fluids or to inject the fluids. And you bring back fluids that can be kind of nasty. And if you're familiar, the one big plant in New York, which was done by NYSERDA, is the Auburn Geothermal Well, which is now not operating as a geothermal well. And the big problem with it is the brines were very nasty and they chewed up all the equipment. And how nasty is this fluid? Well, we talk about fluids from things like shale, which you hear about a lot. This is high temperature dolomitic fluids. These are basin fluids in New York. This is salinity. So the fluids we will bring up from geothermal at depth tend to be the nastiest fluids of all, and they have to be dealt with. So that's a downside of the water aspect of geothermal. Just to give you an idea about New York, if you go to about 13,000 feet, you're at 80 degrees C. If you want to go to 100 degrees C, you're going to 15 to 16,000 feet. So you'll be the deepest wells drilled in New York. If you're going to do hot, dry rock, and this is kind of just a little fun fact for the few geologists in the room, we drilled a well, unfortunately, we were involved in it. It was not one of my better projects. It's called the Montaigne Well in Montgomery County, and the guy that was drilling it, he just didn't stop. And when he should have stopped, he drilled about 1,000 feet into the Precambrian basement, which you would use for hot, dry rock. Look at the minerals. This is like sphalerite, rutile, rose quartz, biotite. The mudlogger, which is a geologist who looks at the cuttings coming out of the well, the guy's sitting there going like, oh my God. He had his college mineralogy book out trying to figure out what he was looking at. But the point is, what is our basement in New York? Our basement is the Adirondacks. So those of you who have hiked the Adirondacks, this is the rock that's pushed up in the basement, and then it comes under the Paleozoic or the Allegheny Plateau. And so what we're talking about is drilling into what is Adirondack-type rocks, where we have the heat, hydraulically fracturing them, and then mining that heat for energy production. Cornell University is pretty hot on this, and I worked with them before I retired. So, yeah, you left that part out, didn't you? Oh, I retired from the state, which might make you wonder about, public benefits to employees. But I have a pension. I'm a pensioner. I go to the bank with my check. Geothermal costs. Here's the real issue. If you're in an area where things are hot, oops, sorry about that. I knew I was going to hit it at some point. This area right here, the dark color, is the really hot stuff. It's like 5 to 8 cents a kilowatt hour wholesale. That's comparable to existing rates. So in that part of the world, you can do geothermal. Over here, a study that we did in the mid-90s, and I don't think it's too far off because these costs haven't come down, we were looking at 15 to 18 cents a kilowatt hour to do a small hydrothermal system. We didn't even estimate enhanced geothermal system. But compared to some other things, that doesn't look that bad. That's competitive with solar. It's not competitive with wind. All right, so the positive effects. Again, jobs, we have to drill lots of wells. We have to simulate those wells. We have to construct facilities. We have to operate the facilities. They take people. On the other side, you can have the potential for some environmental problems by construction of the well, drilling and hydraulically fracturing, water disposal issues of hydrothermal fluids, site-specific disruptions. You have to build a plant. You have to disrupt the ecosystem a little bit, and the potential of spills of those fluids. Induced earthquakes are one of the problems with EGS systems. So you have to re-inject water, and there's always the potential, if you what we call make it a little too hot, you could actually cause seismicity. We've seen it in other injections in Texas, Arkansas, maybe West Virginia, and then Switzerland's the big famous one where they had a big earthquake caused by geothermal injection. The other ones are just caused by brine injection. Now in society though, these plants have 70 to 90% availability and a long plant life. Again, emissions are likely similar to hydropower, what makes them a very, very good source of energy with very little emissions. On the other side, community impacts are pretty low because you're not going to put a lot of these projects in. And cumulative, you have some air and water, noise, visual impacts, but it's relatively limited. Geothermal, if you notice on the first slide, I forgot to mention it, I called it the forgotten renewable. To me, geothermal is one of the things that we need to invest more in because it really isn't that bad. Biomass. I'm not a biomass person, so I'm going to try to do this. Sources, dedicated crops, waste material, forest harvesting. Uses, combustion for electricity and heat, gasification, and liquid fuel production. These things are all done right now. Biomass is actually, in New York State, we use more biomass than any other renewable fuel except hydropower. Hydropower, of course, because of Niagara Falls is a big one, and you know about that here. The problem there is they use a lot of land, and I put this in just because it's fun. Here you see, like, underground coal mining doesn't use much, nuclear doesn't use much, rooftop PV uses very little land compared to other things. Biomass willow gasification, New York, that's the NYSERDA willow gasification problem. Wind won in this study as the singular highest land use per energy unit output of any energy source. So I hate to pick on my biomass friends at NYSERDA, but that's not really all that fair because you can do this in a way where you're putting the willows in non-used land, and it has some good benefits and things like that, and we'll talk about it. But I just thought it was kind of funny. It's a NYSERDA project won the too much land use contest. Water withdrawals. This is where you'll hear about biomass. Oh my God, they use a lot of water, irrigation. Well, you know what? That's true in some parts of the world. Southwest, has anybody ever driven through the desert near Palm Springs and seen the lemon farms? Desert, lemon trees. How much water does that use? Well, that's right, and if you go and try to plant biomass crops in the Southwest, that will be the case. But in the Midwest, it really is no worse than any other energy source to plant biomass crops for energy. So it's just one of those things that's kind of overused. Again, agricultural jobs is a huge benefit. There's indirect job benefits because agriculture, turns out, develops a whole infrastructure that goes along with supplying them. On the positive side, you need a lot of land. There's no way around it. Biomass is a low-density energy source. You need a lot of it. If you are clearing land to grow the biomass, you have an impact. If you're just reusing existing farmed or tilled land, it doesn't have that, and you use water. On the societal side, though, economic development, this biomass production has the potential to support farming communities in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. It creates a manufacturing sector to make farm equipment. Energy, again, somewhat dependent on uncontrollable factors such as weather, and it's cyclical in its nature, which is a downside, but the net energy to produce it is positive for a climate change impact. On the other side, community impacts, you have to compete for the land for food. I think it's a little bit overblown. I'm not one of those food versus fuel people. As an economist, I see both easily being accepted and used because we need both. The land will be developed accordingly. Cumulative impact, though, fertilizer manufacturing, which is usually non-renewable, is a little bit of an issue, and energy and water needs for production could be a problem if you put it in the wrong place. Coal. Coal is probably the most enigmatic energy source for the United States. Sources, deposits from the Carboniferous period mainly. Main suppliers are US and China. China and the US could power both their economies for a long time just simply on coal. Energy generation, steel making. Now, in the uses thing, you're starting to see there's other uses for these things that are critical and need to be considered. It's a big part of steel making, coking. Feedstock for gasification and liquefaction. I worked on a project where we were going to liquefy the coal, or gasify the coal, remethanize, and put it back in the pipeline. The economics were a little bit off, but at some point you'll see that happen. Well, it has some issues. This is a mine in the Philippines from space. It gets no more ugly than that, a deformed landform. This is a coal seam in the Powder River Basin. This is a stunning, probably the thickest in the world. This is enormous, but you know what? In a decade, this doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. Other negative impacts, we have our cold sludge impoundment failure. We have the Massey Energy thing that just hit the press again today where 29 miners got killed. You have mountaintop mining where you basically cut the top off hillsides to mine coal, but if we didn't do that, we wouldn't have an airport in Morgantown, West Virginia, so there's some positives. this is that Cayuga plant right on the lake, the edge of the Finger Lakes, because they need a lot of water. So these are just some other negative impacts. Water withdrawals, by the way, for coal are a big deal. And especially when we start to look at new technology coal, which is this down here, you see they're going to be a heavy water user. So coal is a steam generation. You use steam turbines, and you need water to do that. You need water to cool them. You need water to do everything. So on the positive, jobs, plant support. This gets a little redundant, you know. Tax services, they tend to pay their taxes. Coal plants tend to bring with them a whole bunch of other infrastructure like rail yards and a bunch of other things which tend to create jobs. Negative, on the other side, site disruption. You have to mine it. There are spills related to coal mining. Material removal and tailings. The landscape will never look the same where you mined it. Subsurface, you have acidification and methane migration. You can actually cause methane because the coal actually has a lot of methane in it. On the positive side, for society, we have infrastructure. It tends to develop rail. It tends to create jobs in multiple jurisdictions. You have mining jobs as well as plant jobs. And again, it's domestically sourced, multi-purpose fuel. And that multi-purpose is really key. You're going to have coal for one way or another. On the other side, change in community character. I mean, I don't think I'd want to live in a coal mining community. I mean, I lived in Morgantown, West Virginia for 1 year. I lived across from a mine. It was an underground mine that was in the process of being shut down. It's now shut down. But I don't think I'd want to live in Wyoming, Gillette, Wyoming. Is that near the coal mines? Yeah, Gillette. Anybody live in Gillette, Wyoming? Did I insult anybody? Okay, good. I should. It's being podcast. So I will ultimately insult somebody somewhere. Got it. It won't be the first time this week. Cumulative, acid rain, mercury, and all the other nasty emissions that come out of it. That's where all that stuff comes from. Trees die in the Adirondacks in northern Vermont because of acid rain. It comes from coal, burning coal. Water and ecological, including climate change. There's huge estimates of how many people actually die due to inhaling coal, you know, the particulates. So it's a pretty nasty business. But wait, we're going to have clean coal, right? Clean coal, right? Carbon dioxide capture and sequestration. Does everybody know what that is? That's where you capture the carbon dioxide from burning the coal and you inject it into the rocks and it stays down there forever. And then it doesn't affect the climate. Well, no, it will. But that's the idea. You capture it, you inject it, you stick it in the ground, right here. So you capture it at a plant, you compress it up, you transport it, and you inject it into rocks. And rocks will take it because rocks are all full of fluid. This is just a different fluid you're sticking in there. Well, you need sedimentary rocks to do that. So this gives you an idea of sedimentary basins. And you can see we're in a pretty good spot. We're over here. Appalachian Basin, the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin. The green is onshore and the purple are offshore basins. But you can notice that China's not, I mean, they have a lot of basins, but they don't have a lot of good carbon sequestration basins. So this doesn't help China out with all the coal they have. But you have to, that's number one. You have to have the right geology. Now, I just want to go through Economics 101 because I've really avoided economics except for some pricing things. Human-induced climate change is a classic market failure caused by what we call negative externalities. These are things that hurt you that aren't in the costing equation. Kentucky gets 90% of its power or so from coal. They're paying 5 cents a kilowatt hour, 5 cents a kilowatt hour, or 6 cents a kilowatt hour. What are you paying? A lot more, right? They're not paying for the acid rain in Ohio and things that came here. And in fact, New York and other northeastern states sued the Midwestern states and I won a bunch of money because the acid rain was coming over here and it was landing in the Adirondacks. So human-induced climate change and these things, there's classic market failure. The market doesn't consider them. Economics for carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are not really included. And how do you internalize that? So we have a couple of ways. We're going to talk economics now. We can actually internalize the total cost of causing the pollution. We can apply a tax. We can develop an emissions trading market, which you hear all sorts about, called cap and trade. Or we can create an incentive program for new technology that will make the old polluting technology irrelevant. All right. Well, let's look at how expensive we think it is to see if we can internalize that. And Howard Herzog at MIT estimated it would be about $52 a ton. That's an optimistic estimate. He talks about 5 to 15 to move it. He's at $57 to $67 a ton. That would add 25 to 50% to the cost of electricity for people who get their energy from coal. Or just energy in general, actually, because in New York it would be probably close to the 25% if we did it fully in New York State. But 50% or more in places like Kentucky, West Virginia, and Ohio. How many of you think those people are going to be happy about that and just say, yeah, let's do that? Right? Now you understand the problem with carbon capture and sequestration. Other technologies exist that may lower the price, but that's not necessarily going to happen right away. Using incentives, this is one example where incentives were used. This is Plant Ratcliffe, which is, they broke ground last year, and they got about $600 to $700 million in federal incentives through either an investment tax credit, which they'll get when they build the plant and produce it, and a power initiative subsidy. It seems like a lot of money, but this plant, they made it work because they can sell the carbon dioxide for enhanced oil recovery. So they're willing to take the risk. Because you know what? On new technology like carbon capture and sequestration, no one will take the risk without some incentive. So the government incentivized this plant. Some countries tax it, and Norway actually got 2 projects developed taxing it. It's a bit of a ruse, though. I mean, these are oil projects where they produce a lot of carbon dioxide and they just re-inject it back into bearing formations in the North Sea. But Norway gets 90% of their power from hydropower, so the cost to the ratepayer there was minimal. So it's a little bit deceptive. One proposal in the US was a $24 billion demonstration program, which would cost everybody about 0.1 cents who get power from coal, which is probably non-existent. That would allow them to build about 30-plus Plant Ratcliffes. So that would be a way to incentivize clean coal. In New York, we tried this thing called RGGI, and you all pay for it. Unless you're in a muni, you're all paying for it. Well, right now it's generating about $1.89 a ton, or 0.002 cents per kilowatt hour, so you're not really feeling it. The problem is that it costs $30 to $100 to do CCS, and we're getting $1.89. So what's the likelihood that that RGGI is anything but a wealth transfer payment to the government? That's what it is right now. It's not generating enough money. The money, however, does go into research and development to look at other energy sources. So if you buy that concept, it's a good concept. But if you look at this idea of what if we start putting taxes on carbon, so we start pricing carbon, and this study was done, this is the Giovanni and Richards study, 2010. It's a very good study. They looked at, well, what kind of energy would we get? And it turns out that you'd get pulverized coal with no carbon sequestration at a low number, and they would just pay the penalty. Then you get natural gas combined cycle up to almost 60, and they'll just pay the penalty. And then over 60, finally, you don't get coal, you get natural gas combined cycle with CCS, and maybe IGC with cycle, which would be coal. But you know what? We're not getting 7 right now. They're getting 5. All right. Now, if the cost of coal went up, what really screws it up, now you're done. At 7, there's no shot at getting anybody to build a coal plant. And then we go to the incentive program, which is back to the Plant Ratcliffe model. And this is where you start to see, you know, if you get an incentive and you put a tax on it, but you give some sort of production incentive, you start to get where you get IGCC or integrated gasification combined cycle plants or more modern plants maybe getting built. So this is a tough one because the economics just are politically poison. Oil and gas. Petroleum liquid sources, buoyancy traps, continuous accumulations. A buoyancy trap means the earth forces it up, something catches it, and we produce it. That's what we call a conventional reservoir. Continuous accumulations have some other means they're collected. And for those of you that know about shale now, because you've been here except for the poor guy that hasn't been here before, shale is a continuous accumulation. You have things like coal liquefaction, tar sands, oil shales, uses, transportation fuel, heating, and petrochemical production. We used to use petroleum for generating electricity, but outside of Hawaii, we don't do it in a big way. Natural gas sources, buoyancy traps, continuous accumulations, coal gasification. We use that for electric production, heating, petrochemical production, industrial processes. So even if you don't like natural gas to generate electricity, you have to have natural gas because it's absolutely critical for this. How many of you heat your homes with natural gas? I was at a meeting, my unconventional resources meeting for the DOE, and the environmental representative actually said to this group, and this is like the near homicidal moment in federal government history. She actually says, you know, she's just dissing everything about natural gas until she says, well, you know, I heat with natural gas, I kind of like it. It was like, you see these operators are like, what? Oh my God. The point is natural gas is a pretty nice fuel to heat your home. It's a heck of a lot cheaper than using electricity. My backup's electricity. When I switch to that, it's quite expensive. All right, well, how much do we have? This is the eternal question. Oil, we can see this is United States proved reserves through 2010 is actually on the decline. This little discontinuity is Alaska. But natural gas has done this swing up, and we're starting to actually find more natural gas. The reserves are increasing. Let's look at pricing. Well, this is the EIA, the Energy Information Administration's estimates of prices, and I put the slide up, and I had a guy at Cornell go like, oh, they're always wrong. What's like their projections? Economists always tell you the projections are wrong, but it's the best we can do. They think because the reserves are increasing, that prices are fairly controllable. And I'm going to show you the favorite, as an economist, this is my favorite slide ever made. And I'm still amazed the government put this slide out. This is their projection for oil prices. It could go high, it could go low, it could be somewhere in between. We have no freaking idea where it's going. How comfortable does that make you? This is the federal government's projections of oil prices into the future. Makes me a little nervous. Risk assessment model. This is actually some work that I did years ago. This idea you hear about energy independence is stupid. What you really worry about at the end of the day is, because Canada is okay, right? And you always hear that. A politician will get up and go, on and on and on about energy independence, and then they'll realize there's Canadians there, and then they'll say, oh, and Canada's okay. Well, what they're really getting at is, how vulnerable to disruption are we? So how critically dependent is the economy on the fuel? Do we import a lot of it? If we lose the source of imports, do we have the capacity to replace it? How concentrated it is? How many few or how many producers are there? That tells you how vulnerable you are to a disruption. Let's look at the two. Natural gas represents 20% of our primary energy production, 24% of demand. North America supplies 99% of its natural gas. That's Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Many natural gas competitors with limited concentration, though that's starting to change a little bit because the big oil companies have discovered they like natural gas because they can actually do it. So you're starting to see a little concentration, but generally there's lots of companies. Low supply vulnerability from my assessment. Now let's go back to petroleum. It represents 11% of USA's primary energy production, 37% of demand. 57% of petroleum products are imported net, controlled by large multinationals and national oil companies. Now keep in mind, the multinationals aren't the big ones. The national oil companies are the big ones. Saudi Aramco, Kuwaiti National Oil Company, PDVSA, Venezuela, Petrobras, Brazil. These are national oil companies owned by the government. They're the ones that produce all the oil. I don't feel really that good about that. How about you? Anybody feel good about that? No. Gas start to look a little better there, doesn't it? All right, New York. I love this slide. I'm surprised I didn't get fired for how often I showed this slide when I worked for the state of New York, because they really ignored me mostly. In 2008, only 12% of the New York State total primary energy demand requirement was met from in-state resources, primarily hydropower, biofuels, and natural gas. For petroleum, we produce 0.1% of our demand. 91% is imported. And here's my favorite number at all. I don't know how they get this, but half is from OPEC. The U.S. as a whole is only like 17% from OPEC, but New York State gets half of its petroleum from OPEC. Now do you guys feel good? You're going to go home tonight and say, oh, that's great. I'm glad I heard that guy speak. You're going to go home and say, like, oh, my God, sell my car. All right. Positive and negative again. I'm going to do it for both together. Direct to get jobs, income, you know all about that. Surface disruption, spills, water management. Subsurface drinking water table impacts, if there are any, chemical injections, all that stuff. So this is the possible positive and negatives. You've all heard about that. I don't have to go into it. Societal impacts get more interesting, though. You have infrastructure and growth in an area, and it creates income. And if you don't like that, then that's bad. But generally, most people consider jobs good. Energy for society and all its ramifications. Domestically sourced and multi-purpose. That's primarily natural gas, not oil. Societal impacts, change in community character on and offshore. Right? The Gulf of Mexico proved that offshore impacts occur. The Exxon Valdez proved that there's offshore impacts. So on and offshore. Air, water, noise, visual, ecological, and climate change impacts, because we're burning a hydrocarbon and producing carbon dioxide. And then we have the occasional spill, which we've had a few of lately. We have the Gulf oil spill over here. And these are the guys at Entrix trying to figure out what's going on there. And then we have the most recent one here as of April 21st. I might have missed one since then, which is the Chesapeake one. And here's my favorite line in this. A steel coupling located beneath the well's blowout protector above ground appears to have failed. More than likely, some idiot didn't tighten the bolt tight enough. I mean, it's as simple as that. That's the nature of complex engineering systems. 21st century choices. What is the implications of all this? Well, this is a study done in 2004 for the Europeans, and I've sort of annotated it since then. This is what we call relative life cycle analysis. So we're comparing these things to each other, energy supply factors and choices. So these are, when you look at it, so you look at coal. We have a lot of it, so P is positive. It's available, so P is positive. Without CCS, it's not particularly attractive from an environmental and social perspective. If you include CCS, you could probably live with it. And that's where a lot of the more mainline environmental groups are. Like, we can kind of live with it, You look at oil and gas, though. It's pretty plentiful, pretty available. The acceptability of oil is not particularly good. It has climate change impacts. It comes from sources that are particularly nasty. Though there's not a shortage of it, so to speak. Gas, pretty good supply, or pretty good accessibility. We are, as I showed you, it's increasing supply. That's happening worldwide. So gas is becoming plentiful. And for the most part, compared to oil, people are happier with it. And if you look back to my security of supply analysis, you can kind of say, okay, I think gas is a little bit better. At least we can get it from somebody we like. Biomass is sort of in the middle with everything, but it's quite positive in acceptability. Most people accept it until we got into the food versus fuel, but that's only corn ethanol. So for the most part, that looks pretty good, but it's not a huge supply. It can't replace oil and gas. Nuclear, it's accessible, it's available. The French like it. I think other people may feel differently right now. What about you? Do you think maybe it's a little, the Chinese have pulled it off the table. That just gives you an idea, okay? Hydropower, it's accessible, it's available. Again, repowering is quite acceptable because you don't have to build another dam. But build another dam in this country. Right. Geothermal, it's not that accessible, but it's getting better. Its availability, it tends to be in the wrong spot, which is the problem with it. It's somewhat available and it's somewhat acceptable, except for in Hawaii, because why? Anybody know why the Hawaiians didn't want geothermal energy? Stealing Pele's energy. Right? Culture. You know, the fire goddess of fire, whatever, right? Pele. So it's pretty acceptable. Wind, onshore wind is not that acceptable or accessible. It's kind of hard to get onshore wind plants permitted. And let me tell you, I've done this. I've gone to meetings where I wouldn't put a name tag on because I didn't want to get harassed. Offshore has become more acceptable because, well, nobody lives out there unless it's close to the Kennedys. Then it becomes unacceptable. It's not that available. I mean, it's really hard. You'll see these numbers, but the reality of doing that, I showed you the 12,000 turbines to replace one hydro plant. It's not that easy to do. But it's very acceptable, and solar is kind of in the same category. It's going to be hard to get a lot of it. It's going to be hard to get a lot of it. But it is accepted. And I actually think, for those of you on the webcast, that's actually wrong. That should be a P. Not an N, but that's okay. All right, that may be a stupid question. What's the better question after going and suffering through this whole discussion? What can we live with? What can we live with? I mean, can we live with dams? Can we live with oil and gas, wind, solar? Climate change Sasquatch is my friend. He's with all my talks. What can we live with? Greenhouse gases, nuclear accidents, offshore drilling, Cape Wind. Kennedy's, anything. If you actually read some of the environmental groups' positions, they'll go against everything sooner or later. Everything sooner or later. But we as a society have to decide what can we live with. Well, failure seems to be a big thing. You know, does that mean the regulators can't regulate because things fail? Well, there's a good book, and this is my friend Mike Uretsky, who's emeritus at NYU, pointed this out to me. He wrote a good paper, and I stole this from him. Perot's Normal Accidents was written in 1984. There are no such things as a system that is totally risk-free. No matter how we work to reduce the likelihood of failure, there's always some minimal probability that sometime, someplace, there will be failure. That's life. Now, betrayal aversion is even a more interesting character. There's some new studies that have come out of this on consumer behavior. The mere possibility of betrayal threatens the social order, enables us to trust safety infrastructure of a society, causing intense visceral reactions and negative emotions towards the betrayer. Have you read the press lately? It was wind 10 years ago. It's natural gas now. Betrayal aversion. You told me it was safe, but you have a problem. Now I'm unhappy. It's an emotional response, and it's a suboptimal, from an economics perspective, reaction. So, how do you balance this idea of risk symmetry, potential impacts, positive and negative, this idea of balancing risk? Well, negative asymmetry is what you read an awful lot from environmental groups, is that all these things, these bad ecological impacts, far outweigh any jobs or anything else we could have in society. And that's what I call a negative asymmetry, or asymmetrically negative. On the other side, you have companies and economic development people who argue that these energy investments in our community are necessary for our society, and the positive outweighs that risk of a normal accident. New York State regulates on this balance. We call it the State Environmental Quality Review Act. Government agency must review the environmental impacts of its actions. They have to find things that are reasonably can be anticipated. And it doesn't mean they have to avoid it, but you have to avoid it to best as practical. They're not trying to stop something because that has a negative impact. But you're trying to balance those risks and decide if you can, as a society, in a qualitative way, live with it. From an idealistic perspective, it's a beautiful, beautiful approach. From a practical perspective, it's a bit tortured. Now, the law gives, through seeker in New York State, you have this ability to react very quickly to things that go wrong. You have the ability to react and make changes as needed because you're acting from this seeker law. In Pennsylvania, for example, they don't have a seeker, so they have to go through a rulemaking process. It's a little slower. They can't react instantly, but going through the whole process is much faster. So there's just different approaches that states take. For oil and gas, for example, we have the 1992 Oil and Gas Solution Mining Act, which went into effect, which regulates the oil and gas industry through permit conditions derived from a seeker action called the Generic Environmental Impact Statement. Generic means like actions, so therefore you can have one process to review them, and that's a drilling permit. And it looked at everything: surface water, groundwater, agriculture, historical sites, agricultural sites, on and on and on. It looked at everything. We thought, but it didn't. Not addressed in the 1992 GEIS, which was 12 volumes and 937 pages, were high-volume fluid management and multiple wells at single sites. Why multiple wells at a single site is from air emissions. The 1992 document said air emissions would be temporary, therefore there was no need to review it. But a multi-well site may be considered permanent. So this is why we went in. We did another document, 800 pages, 9 chapters, 26 appendices, 114 references cited by DEC, 473 references cited by NYSERDA consultants. Even after all that, we're still kind of in this quagmire. In December of 2010, there was an executive order that extended the moratorium and named it as a moratorium on drilling. However, that's only for high-volume hydraulic fracturing and multi-well pads. It's not for all drilling. It's not for shale specifically. Well, that document looked at enhanced setbacks for spills, wastewater disposal, groundwater contamination, chemical disclosure, air quality, site, visual noise impacts, mitigation plans, raw use agreements, review of local planning rules. It had all that kind of stuff in it. Nobody read it because it was 800 plus pages. No, you might have read it. You did. Right. The next one that comes out will be 2,000 pages long. I mean, it's good. When this thing gets done, it's going to be 2,000 plus pages long because you got to put all the it's going to be just a monster. I don't have to worry about it. That's why I retired. But back to policy. It is stated in New York state law and defended by the courts. As New York appellate courts say, we must be cognizant of the environmental amenities will often be in conflict with economic and technical considerations. To consider the former, along with the latter, must involve a balancing process. In some instances, environmental costs will outweigh economic and technical benefits, and while in other instances they may not, but seeker mandates a rather finely tuned and systematic balance analysis in every instance. New York state law is the balance. Societally, we have to decide if we can live with that balance. There's no such thing as it has an impact, don't do it. We'd have no energy sources. Balancing the risks is sound and unfortunately slow environmental policy. New York does do it right at the end of the day. Energy choice is a national policy context, then I'll wrap up. Well, what do we use here? Just for your reference, natural gas, coal, and petroleum. We are a hydrocarbon society. This is 2009. These are relatively new numbers. Projections to 2035, coal, natural gas, oil, and other liquids. You see a huge increase in liquid biofuels, and renewables actually grows considerably. But in 2035, we'll still be a hydrocarbon economy. This is the EIA's projections. For natural gas, the projection is 46% will come from shale in 2035. Amazingly, that is up 25% since last time they did a projection. Let's go on. Energy policy. The White House issued its blueprint for a secure energy future on March 30th. This is just the table of contents, develop and secure energy, provide consumers with choices, innovate our way. What do they actually say about oil and gas? America's oil and natural gas supplies are critical components of our nation's energy portfolio. Their development enhances our energy security and fuels our nation's economy. And it goes on to say, provide incentives to spur efficient oil and gas development, responsible development of Atlantic, offshore, and Atlantic. Now keep in mind, this is after the Macondo well in the Gulf. This is this year, March 30th. This is the Obama administration. Go to this side. Do studies, okay? But, okay, we're going to do studies on hydraulic fracture safety, but I'm going to appoint a board, and in 6 months they're going to recommend fracking. They're not even waiting for their own study. They're not even going to wait for their own study. Why not? Anybody? What happens before the study's done? Boom, bingo. Here's my favorite. Help other nations do shale. Not only are we going to do it, we're going to help other nations do it while we're at it. Blueprint for other challenges. So you get into it. Harness energy's clean energy potential. Encourage commercial development of new and emerging clean energy sources. Coal with carbon capture and storage, and nuclear. This is the Obama administration, folks. Over here. Ensure access to critical minerals needed for clean energy. They acknowledge the mining thing. I'm not just making that up. Continued permitting of utility-scale renewable energy projects on public lands. More R&D spending. I like that part. It looks like this. Here's, here it is again. Clean coal, nuclear, solar, and wind. Oh, no, this was George Bush's energy plan in 2006. It's the same plan. Why is it the same plan? Who wants to hazard a guess? Not just, well, the election is symbolic of the moment because you don't have any other choice. It's easy as that. I gave this talk at Cornell University to a group of antis who had no questions when I was done because there are no questions to this. This is policy. It has to be. We don't have another choice right now. It's the Democrats. It's the Republicans. We don't have another choice. Final thoughts. I'm done. Almost. Back to it. Are there any energy choices that are sustainable? How many think yes? That's right. We use things. We can't replace them. These definitions are stupid. What you want to do is try to do it in such a way that in the long term you'll figure something else out. But that something else has not been figured out yet. All right, we need to innovate our way. We really need to continue to support public R&D, which seems kind of odd after all this whole thing. But the reason for that is you can't predict disruptive change. Who would have thought we'd still be burning coal like we did in 1950? I think people, if you went back, anybody who was alive in 1950 and had been asked the question, which wasn't, you would probably say, I can't believe we're still burning all this coal. I mean, come on, we haven't figured out how not to truck this stuff around. Can you believe in 2050 we still won't be burning all this coal? Studies show that we underfund private sector R&D. And working in R&D for 20 years of my life, I can tell you we monstrously underfund R&D that leads to drastic societal changes. And the reason for that is that private companies can't make money at it fast enough. So government has to do it. But we've created a bureaucracy of funding that just makes it torture, which is really unfortunate. But we still have to do it. Government-supported research helped create internet, fuel cells, nuclear power, commercial jet aircraft, et cetera. Now, I have some references down there that I can't really go into, but one of them is an anti on this argument. I read the book going, he basically defends R&D by saying he doesn't like it. So I thought it was interesting. Back to the cell phones. You wondered why I had that in there, didn't you? The first cell phone network started 30 years ago. 90% of the world has access to cell phones. The first one started 30 years ago in Tokyo, 1979. Is that stunning? 5.3 billion mobile cellular subscriptions. Access to mobile networks for 90% of the population. 2 billion videos, 5 billion Flickr. This is what we're looking for in energy. We haven't found it yet. But that's the issue. Thank you very much. By the way, this is a real sign. This is a real sign in Hawaii. I just love that. It's like, we can worry about this, but just keep your eyes out. So, thanks.